Alright folks, how you doing? So I'm recording this video on a day when Scotland face England in the Euros. Interesting to see how that turns out, but given that we got beat off the Czech Republic, I don't really fancy our chances. But that brings us to the subject of today's video, and this ties into an email that I sent to Michael Tazarian of Unslaved yesterday. A shout out to him. Um, it'll be interesting to see if he gets back to me and what he has to say if he does. But it seems to me that in the case of both William Wallace and George Washington, with the Scottish and American wars of independence, it wasn't so much that America won or Scotland won, it was that England lost. Because in both conflicts, and I've noticed this having studied them both, in both conflicts, England had the advantage every step of the way. There was no way they should have won either, they should have lost even either of those wars, or that Scotland or America should have won, because England had every advantage. But it goes to show how fragile a military occupation of any sort of description truly is, because Wallace made mistake after mistake after mistake. And if you've been following my previous videos, you'll see what I mean. Like in his early career, Wallace, he was there for the taking. It's like Valley Forge with George Washington. They could have just went out there and, snubbed this rebellion out in an instant. And there's multiple cases where they could have and should have stomped out Wallace like a bug, like that. It should have been over with. They could have just gone after him and finished it. But for some reason, they just hesitate and hold back and don't commit. And, they try to play nice and they try to placate and they try to make peace offers and peace treaties. And we're going to see more of this, by the way. But, in stalling and in hesitating and just not taking the decisive action that was needed, they're giving this man Wallace more of a following. They're making him a legend. They're turning him into a living legend while he's still alive, let alone, nowadays, 700 years later, this is still the Kingdom of Wallace. I'm writing novels about William Wallace, and that's actually the name of the fourth one. The Kingdom of Wallace is the name of the fourth book, which I have planned, because it still is. Scotland is the Kingdom of Wallace. It very much is. We're still under his shadow 700 years later. But Wallace was not a man beyond making mistakes. And same with Washington, but we'll get into him much further down the road when we talk about the War of the Covenant in the 17th century and the Declaration of the National Covenant 1638, how that all ties in with the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all this sort of thing, because that's going to come up. That will be addressed in this channel because it ties very much into Scottish history. I mean, the American Republic is very much a daughter of Scotland. You can believe that. It all goes back to Scotland. Like some of the founding members, Presbyterians, of which I was myself raised. I'm a Presbyterian, a proud Presbyterian at that. But how many of the founding members of the American Revolution were descendants of the Covenanters, from the 17th century. We'll get into all of this, But getting back to Wallace, I mean, they're turning him continually, through their, not action, but inaction, through holding back, through trying to placate, through trying to play nice, with, it kind of reminds me of the Bajoran occupation from Deep Space Nine, when Cisco was pointing out to Gul Dukat, when they're stuck in the cave and Dukat's going crazy. They were never going to play nice with you. What the hell are you talking about? Where Dukat's talking about how he introduced like reforms and medical measures and all this, abolishing child slavery, and like Cisco's looking at him. What, are you nuts? You thought that was going to change their mind? It's kind of along the same kind of lines. Like, no matter what the English did, the Scots were never going to lay down, and it was only a matter of time before a champion like Wallace rose up and challenged them. And it's very interesting to see how meek, and how soft, really, the English were in the face of all this, and how they're still trying to play diplomacy and all this when that was not what was needed. You needed to go out there and just, squash this thing. But they just refuse to do it, and they're trying to go down the diplomatic route all the time, when that's not the way that they should have been handling this. And they could have won the war. England could have won the war very easily. And I'm saying this just because I'm completely honest with you. It's not because I'm an unpatriotic Scot. It's because the English gave the Scots so many chances when they should never have done it. That was not to their benefit. But the Scots, to their credit, took advantage of these openings every step of the way. And Wallace, in his mid to later career, which was a distinctly separate thing, But Wallace, when he really starts to rise to prominence, after he's made these early errors, these early mistakes, and he made a lot of them. He should have died so many times in those early years, or been captured or thrown in prison or something. And he was, as we saw, but more than that, Wallace was very vulnerable and out there in the open, as we're going to get into when we read the next chapter here. There's so many instances where he should have died, and you can't help but think that it must have been some sort of divine intervention that he didn't, and that he rose to become, the governor and the guardian and the general and even the king, that he became. It's just amazing, because in his mid to later career, Wallace became one of the best generals, I think, in the history of the world. It's amazing to me that William Wallace isn't considered one of the top 5 generals who ever lived, because he fought armies who outnumbered him 6-1 and beat them on more than one occasion. There's actually more than once where Wallace fought against an army that outnumbered him 6-1 and beat them and won. So if that doesn't put you in the top 5 list of best generals who ever lived, I don't know what the hell you need to do to qualify for that list. But he did. I mean, he deserves to be spoken of in the same breath, to my mind, as Alexander the Great. But all we have instead is Hollywood garbage like Braveheart. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek. It's a good movie, but historically speaking, it's complete rubbish. You look at the Battle of Stirling with no bridge. The bridge was the whole point, but whatever. But you look at the non-existence of tactics in Braveheart, where it's just run at them and hope for the best. That was not real life, folks. I mean, in real life, Wallace used, I've said this in the previous video as well, he was the master of psychological warfare. Well, more like typed it than said it, but I've pointed this out in previous videos. Wallace was an expert at getting in an opponent's head. He could outmaneuver them very easily. He was the master of these sorts of things, and warfare is as much psychological as it is anything else. In fact, probably more so. As to my mind, the 3 things that dictate the course of a war are logistics, psychology, and momentum, as well as a 4th thing, motivation. Like, why are you fighting? How were the Scots able to win when they're outnumbered 6-1? Well, because one side is highly motivated and the other side isn't. It's as simple as that, and sometimes it comes down to that, But yeah, it's quite amazing that England managed to lose. It really is, It's like, how, I mean, reading these early chapters, it's like the one recurring thought that's always in the back of my mind is, how the hell did the English lose this war? How did they throw this all away? Because if you look at the face value on the surface, like, there's no way they could have or should have possibly lost this war. There's no way that they should have. And it's the same with the American Revolution as well. It's like, how the hell did Britain lose that war? But like I said, it all comes down to psychology, momentum, motivation. These things matter. Numbers are pretty unimportant, actually. It's like the Great Patriotic War with the Germans and the Russians. Given the very early victories of the Germans, it's like, how the hell did they lose that? Because the Russians were always on the back foot, always retreating, or being encircled by the blitzkrieg and all this, and they're taking massive losses, and it's like, how the hell are the Russians going to turn this around? Well, give it time. Success cannot last. Momentum does eventually have to slow down to a crawl. We'll see the same thing happen with Wallace. He doesn't win the war, Wallace. Spoilers. Bruce wins the war, but Wallace is the one who starts it. He's the catalyst. He's the impetus for all this sort of thing. But anyway, thanks for watching.